I'm Susie Shaw, mom of two, now adult boys, and author of the book Mother of Boys Survival Guide. This podcast shares practical insights, expert advice, and real conversations to help moms raise confident, capable boys. You can find more episodes and resources at mothersofboys.life. Now, let's get into today's conversation. How divorce affects boys. Signs your son needs extra support. Today, we're talking about a life change that affects over 1 million children a year, divorce. While every child responds differently, boys often process their emotions in ways that parents don't always recognize. So how can you tell if your son is simply adjusting or if he's struggling and needs extra support? My guest today is Jarrod Hoffman, a counselor from Memphis, Tennessee, who specializes in helping boys navigate divorce, trauma, and other major life challenges. He'll help us recognize the signs, understand what boys are really experiencing, and share practical ways moms can help. So, Jarrod, welcome to the Mothers of Boys podcast.
Thanks for having me, Susie.
So can you tell me just a little bit about, what drew you to being a counselor and a therapist in this area of trauma of working with boys?
Sure. Yes. My parents were divorced when I was 10 years old, and I saw porn for the first time at 11. And it wasn't until 25 years old that I finally made it to a counselor, which sometimes I use the word embarrassed. Maybe it's a mix of embarrassed and unaware that I actually was living in my college dorm, and 3 literal doors down the hall was the counseling office. And I always thought, why would anyone need to go to counseling? Here I am struggling with all these unwanted behaviors and loneliness. And so I am passionate about making the gap smaller between the time that someone enters counseling for the first time to talk about those things and, being a teenage boy. So the short answer is I was a former adolescent boy who struggled with a lot of things.
I am quite certain that makes you very empathetic to, the boys and the young men that you are advising and counseling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, what age do you think is, the most concerning when a trauma like this happens? And I will share that after 9/11, my kids were little, but I heard a child psychologist in a presentation tell us that our little kids were not a concern per se
Mm,
because they
mm-hmm.
just don't really comprehend what's going on, and that the older kids, high school plus, older, had the mental maturity to kind of begin to process it and make sense of that traumatic event. But the ones that were of real concern were, that fourth, fifth, middle school kind of grade where the child was old enough to comprehend, but didn't have the emotional maturity to really process it. So I'm just sort of curious, what age do you think can be the most traumatic for the people that you talk with?
My first response was 12 years old or something like that. I actually think about maybe some of the factors of the trauma that make it the most difficult. So age, certainly like in developmentally important moments, right? We talk about attachment issues from 0 to 3 or 0 to 5 can have a profound and lasting impact on kids. At the same time, when I do see adults, and myself included in therapy, we're talking about memories and impactful moments from 10 to 14. The times where you're detaching from your parents and you're establishing your own identity. So the things I would call out as a answer to your question, like what are the most impactful ages if trauma happens? I'd probably shift from age to circumstances, right? The young child or the old teen that has that emotional capacity or that they don't have a real memory necessarily. It's just not conscious. And so one of the definitions of trauma is actually or the issues that arise from trauma are the aloneness of the trauma. And so I'd be more concerned about, do they have anybody with them or do they have anyone to connect to? And so if you're 5 and you have someone who's with you in a healthy parent attachment during a trauma, I'd say the outlook is pretty good. If you're 15 and you can verbalize it, but you were alone in the trauma, right? Sexual abuse that you could tell no one about, that is going to be substantially more impactful in a negative way.
Well, that makes sense. And you said that one of your reactions, I guess, when you went through that trauma was porn,
hmm
right?
hmm
So, what ways do young males exhibit, signs?
Signs of the trauma that they might
Mhm.
have experienced. Yeah.
Yeah.
2 words come to mind when I think about boys and how they respond to trauma. Internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So externalizing are the things that get kids kicked out of school most of the time, right? Anger, irritability, shouting, cuss words at a teacher, maybe not even going to school because you can't get them to physically get out of bed. Those are those externalizing behaviors.
Right.
Internalizing, those are tricky because they might actually look like everything is good and healthy and they're getting the good grades. That's something I see a lot. I see as many grades as I do A grades.
Mhm.
A pluses. They're perfect. Why would they need any help? And here they are silently wondering if I'm enough. Am I really good enough? How do I prove myself? And that might take the form of like anxiety about doing well in school. It might take the form of depression, and they kind of keep this great mask, and then they go home and they lay in bed all day.
And do you also see girls in your practice? Do you think it affects girls and boys differently?
Yeah, that's interesting. I see some girls in a contract that I work with at a school, and I've worked with girls over the years. I think most people and experts kind of talk about how the externalizing is uh, historically something that the boys struggle with, while the internalizing is something that girls struggle more with. But, there's a spectrum, right? There might be um, guys like myself who naturally tend toward those like behaviors that are not as noticeable. Porn is a great example of like you can do that a lot of times and no one has any idea. And so girls tend to be in that category on average, whereas the boys on average are showing the aggression and the anger and the frustration.
I do wanna mention to our listeners that we did a podcast with a porn counselor, and that podcast is called Middle School Boys and Risky Behavior: Warning Signs and How to Respond. So this conversation really dovetails into that one. So, when should a parent consider counseling?
Mm,
And really, how do you bring up the idea with your son that this is something you wanna do and, so that he feels like there's nothing it's not that there's something wrong with him, it's, doing something positive.
mhm. We'll get to the positive part after. I'll answer kind of the first part, and then we can
Mhm,
revisit the second. If we're going down the lens of internal and external behavior, and we're asking the
mhm,
question, how do we know that this is worthy of counseling? The external, I think of 3 words, and it's a way that a framework to understand like behavior and so the 3 words are intensity, frequency, and recency. So if
mhm.
I'm seeing this anger, this irritability, let's say I'm blowing up in relationships or I'm punching holes in walls, right? I wonder the number of teen boys who have punched a hole in a wall, but are they doing it frequently, right? Is this like I'm patching these walls every week? What's going on?
Mhm. Right.
Or So that would be frequency. Recency, was it 3 years ago and it hasn't happened since? Or intensity, was it like I kind of slammed the door and I kind of like punctured the drywall?
Hmm.
Or is it like I took a baseball bat and I was beating up against, I had to replace the whole wall. I was worried about the foundation because
Well,
is so intense.
and I can say as a mother of boys, sometimes that's sort of a gray line of, you know, play and
Sure.
the baseball just went through the wall, oops, and that aggression, and
That would
you're
be
showing up afterwards,
Yeah, that would
often.
be like intensity. Is this
Right.
an intense? Was it an accident? Was it planned? Right? I actually had a plan to punch a hole in the wall. I like was ready to do it. That's different than I was playing around with a friend and we accidentally put, one example would be like controllers. Like, are they throwing controllers around the room? And so frequency, recency, intensity. Those are things when you're thinking about your boy's behavior, is how high on those scales does it land? If we go to the internalizing, it's trickier because internalizing is the behavior and the shame and the guilt that's going to come with that is easier to hide. It's easier to hide that than a hole in the wall. So I would wonder, is there hiding that your teen or your boy is doing? Are they one of the signs for porn, right, is are they hiding their phone? Like if you touch it, they're very nervous.
Mhm.
As someone who has looked at, I've felt that and that all that stuff, you don't see that. So is there a change in their behavior? Did they used to like activities and interests that they no longer like? And even that one's tricky because interest level is going to change from 10 years old to 16-year-olds old. They're not going
Mhm.
to want to play with Legos anymore.
Right.
But is it like they used to like to hang out with that group and now they don't? These are all like really tricky ways or difficult to navigate with like an anxiety or depression in a boy.
Hmm.
And then
And
you talked about the positive parts, right?
correct. And how to pitch that, "Hey, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna get you somebody to talk with."
Yeah, the illustration I give a lot because I'll see quite a spectrum of people who are either on the external side and they're putting holes in walls, or they're the internal side where like their parents actually they're in the room for something different than what their parents brought them there for. And
Mhm.
it's as soon as it's kind of opened up, their parent they've been hiding it. So I see this spectrum. But what I say, especially if it's like there's not quite as obvious of a reason, your parents are just a little bit concerned, is I kind of say like physical therapy, right? I see people whose backs are completely broken. Like, I think we can walk again. I'm pretty confident that we can get you to walk again, but it's going to be a long road and it's a pretty intense recovery. It doesn't mean that if I kind of tweaked my back and it's, oh man, what happened? That's not worthy of going to counseling for and getting guidance for. It just means that you're not in a wheelchair right now. But untreated, some of those like tweaked back pain moments can turn into long chronic pain where I'm really struggling. And so if you're, presenting in my room and there's not these obvious big things, that's okay. We're just going to kind of like give you some ways to walk a little bit better, get your posture up that are going to prevent future injury.
I like that analogy. Um, and I had 2 boys. They're both in their, you know, later 20s now, and we did take them to a counselor. We called him the boy whisperer, and he was incredible, and, we weren't going through a divorce, but, there's just life communication, you know, tips, I think that was very helpful for the counselor to communicate with our sons and to let them have an opportunity with a trusted source, to build a rapport and get advice that wasn't coming from mom and dad because they just sometimes can't hear us, and you need them to be able to hear
Yeah.
somebody,
How
right?
did you pose that to them when you initiated the conversation?
Um, we probably didn't give them a whole lot of choice.
Mm,
Just like if they had a fever and you took them to the doctor,
mhm,
we made an appointment with the counselor and we referred to all of the lots of different people, but also, counselors as coaches. So that was just a receptive term that our boys embraced, and so this was your life coach.
mm,
And, you have an executive functioning coach or organizational coach, or you might have a science coach, whatever it is. And the word coach really sort of helped them feel okay about it, I think.
mhm. The thing that you mentioned that I would sort of build on as well when you talked about the divorce piece, that divorce is very complex because it really is like the perfect example of like a systemic issue. And
Mhm.
so if we talk about trauma and we talk about aloneness, divorce for kids and children of the divorce is extremely lonely. They might be able to confide with their sibling, not always. I know when my parents experienced divorce, I'm pretty sure at the school, maybe there were 60 kids who went to my school. There were like three that had parents who were divorced. I'm sure there were other parts of that, but it didn't feel like the friends that I had experienced that. And so the aloneness comes as well. So you got your peer aloneness, you also have parent aloneness, right? Now this relationship that maybe used to be comforting is very challenging. And even as a kid, you're picking up on like, is my parent kind of using this conversation or what I say as evidence for whether I should live with them or the other parent. The triangulation that can happen between now these multiple relationships is very scary, very dangerous. When you ask the question, like, does my kid need therapy during a divorce? I would say they have a lot more aloneness, potential for aloneness, and divorce and life changes. I have this quiz that refer people to that is 15 domains of whether or not a child needs therapy. And one of those domains is like any major life changes in the last year. Because PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, is going to measure after, I think it's 6 months, but before that, there is actually a designation for an acute stress disorder. So your kid during a divorce of aloneness and intense stress and all the things that come with that can already be in the pathway to developing a post-traumatic stress disorder, and that early intervention, like while it's happening versus years later, can actually steer them in a direction to where they actually navigate that trauma very healthy in a healthy way. The 9/11 is a great example. It's like most people experienced some level of trauma around witnessing such a violent and open act, and yet didn't develop PTSD. And it's because we had a lot of people had communities to be able to, rally around. Divorce, not the case. You're not often going to be able to find a group of like young boys who are like, oh, bro, I was right there with you. Let me walk alongside you and help you think through that.
Find your explanation with the alone part of it to be really valuable as a sign maybe too that for a parent that, this is a a traumatic event and you need to do something about it. What other signs, warning signs can you,
Yeah,
identify?
we kind of been touching on this one. This is a great one. Do you have peers?
Mhm.
Especially in the 12 years old and older, you're starting to try to find your place. If you were to ask your boy if they have good friends, are they texting people that they consider their friends? Do they have any social events that they're interested in going in? Especially if there's a change. There used to be and now there's not. That's a sign for sure that maybe they need someone else to talk to, or they haven't quite figured out how to navigate that social change to find those friends. The super obvious one that we talk about all the time is screen time. The easy number to remember is, are they spending 2 hours, more than 2 hours a day on screens? I'm pretty sure that includes school. So a lot of people are in this category, and it's not that, oh man, they're spending 5 and and they're gonna die. It's more like if it's 2 or if it's more than 2, the chances of depression go up significantly with each additional hour. So they're not potentially going to die, but if they're spending 5 or 6 hours, then the chances are just higher that they have depression.
Mhm. You talk about that screen time, and I remember, a moment when one of my sons I always had the philosophy that all the tech in the house was mine. I was gonna
Mhm.
pick it up and look at it anytime I wanted to. I paid for it. It was mine. And I remember one of my sons being very possessive of his iPad,
Mm,
and
mhm.
I grabbed it and looked at it and saw a photo that had been sent to him by a friend that was cutting themselves.
Mm, mhm.
And so this he was a sensitive kid. I mean, I think any kid that got that would be concerned for their friend, and I felt like that was a trauma for him that wasn't necessarily going on in our house, but was going on out in the world, and so
Mhm.
that was a moment where we got counseling for him so that he could understand, how to support the friend, but not get in the hole with them, and so what traumas I mean, when you talk about traumas, that might be another example, but, what other traumas do you see in your practice?
Oh, wow. I see, uh, trauma, that one's like kind of a physical manifestation of what's going on internally. I would actually view that as like a positive moment. This child was felt freedom enough in that friendship to reach out for help. That's what it was. When you talk about those internalizing uh, or teens or boys who internalize, they are going to be saying those statements t- that might like kind of like perk up your ears of like, huh, I wonder if something is going on. And those statements are a cry for help, right? It's like,
Mhm.
what would you do if I wasn't here? They're wondering if they are kind of discovering that they need help, and they're wondering if this is a safe place to
Mhm.
share some of those things. I wonder if, like, you would still love me if I did this thing. Huh.
Uh-huh.
Be curious about that. Traumas in my work, there's a lot of attachment issues, a lot of dads or moms who aren't in the picture or who left, um, divorce, those physical manifestations that could be unwanted sexual behavior, that could be gambling. That's super prevalent these days. Obviously, social media is the most, scrolling on social media is the obvious addiction that they're wrestling with. Um, Peer issues are a big one. I probably have been surprised by the amount of bullying that has occurred, even to the extent that some of the symptoms that you might see for ADHD or depression or anxiety are rooted in the people they don't consider them friends, but attend their school and treat them very poorly.
I just wanna, go back 1 second
Mhm.
to that moment, um, with my son, because what I was remembering is that I told him I mean, in addition to getting him counseling about that, I told him this was an adult problem and that
Mhm.
I was gonna talk to the mom and that that there's levels of problems, and some problems a child, teenager, young adult can manage, and then there's others that need help.
Mhm.
And so I think it was a relief to him to take that responsibility for that event off him and say, I will respectfully, quietly, let the other parent know because that's the right thing to do.
if we're going back to that physical therapy analogy, it's not his
Mhm.
responsibility to be stitching up his friend's lower back after an accident,
Yeah,
right?
right.
That's for people who are equipped, trained, uh,
Mhm.
probably paid, not just even like a volunteer. Even you see that like the communities are very valuable in mentorship, but the level of intensity, recency of the picture that was shown, put that in a new category. But if your friend is struggling with back pain, of course, that's actually most of the time people don't just see me for like small pains because that's being taken care of in those healthy peer relationships, healthy parent relationships, healthy relationships with mentors in the community. It's usually when things kind of escalate into more intense problems. So I think taking that responsibility off your son was very valuable.
So, what advice if a mom is listening today and is worried about her son, what do you think is the first step?
I have that quiz. That's a really easy
Mhm.
way. You can go to my website. It's
And we will
bolded in
share that,
green. Yeah.
in the podcast on, the Mothers of Boys Life
And that
webpage.
was just helpful to get thinking about like the domains, what to think about. Screen time is very, very high. Okay, cool. But what about peer relationships? What about academics? What about somatic symptoms? Are they struggling with like stomach aches all the time or headaches? And at least as a parent myself, it's so obvious to me, of course. I'm like, oh yeah, duh, your kid has depression. But like it's so easy for me to forget that I haven't played with my daughter in 2 days, and maybe that's what's leading to this acting out behavior. It's like, "Oh, we haven't been on the swing set yet in a couple of days." And so, maybe the first thing I would say is it doesn't mean you're a bad parent that you didn't catch this. Generally, if they're hiding behavior, they're really good at it. They're creative. If it's hiding screen behavior, oh my goodness, they will get around everything that you've created. Because, like an example of like those devices are your devices unless they've acquired a device that isn't your device, right? Like that's
They're
very
tricky.
easy.
Oh,
They're
yes.
tricky. And so, take the weight off of that. And now responsibility to look, there's tons of resources. Your website has plenty of resources to kind of wonder, are they in need of kind of checking up on some of those back pains,
Mhm.
those little things that might turn into something if it's not totally obvious. I put in the quiz, I didn't put things like self-harm or hallucinations or some of those things because those just tend to be very obvious. You're probably not going to miss them. And the moment that you find out about them, you go right to counseling. I've obviously a proponent of like counseling helps a lot of people. And I feel like it probably helps more people than it hurts. And so why not if you have the resources? And so I usually recommend that to parents. But the thing I usually leave parents with and want to remind them of is their importance. Parents are the two most important relationships on the entire planet. Like there are no two humans that are more valuable in the health of their child than their parents. I'm going to say it in another way because it's just so important to hear. Like of 7 or 8 billion people on the planet, they come to me and they talk about their relationship with their parents.
Mhm.
So you are
Yeah.
valuable and your relationship with them is going to span far longer than any other relationship that exists. And it's going to be of the most importance. So when you think, what should I do? You should do something and you should know that you're going to be in it for a long haul, even if you don't see the benefits, the verbal thank yous, right?
Mm.
You
No.
probably didn't get a thank you until late 20s, maybe. Like,
I'm still
wow,
waiting. I'm waiting.
still
Um,
waiting. You might wait your whole life.
yeah, well, one's married and one's engaged, and their spouses now are very thankful.
Mhm, mhm.
So if there's one thing that a mom should take away from the conversation today, it sounds to me like, her worth in this relationship is monumental. Is that what you would say?
Monumental is an excellent word. Imperative. Imperative is a good word.
I would say for a mom who's going through divorce, it's a traumatic experience for themselves, right? And so sometimes it's hard to recognize that not only your child but also you are going through a trauma. And we have recorded a podcast called Surviving Divorce and Protecting Your Kids, What Moms Need to Know, which is more of that side of the equation. I just want to encourage moms to step in to figure it out and get the help for their sons, because these moments are fleeting, and they're not going to need it forever. It's these humps. You want them to have the ability to come to you and say, okay, I could use a little help right now. And they're not going to be able to have that ability to look within themselves and make that determination without the experience of how helpful it was to begin with, you know? And the first time both sons went to a therapist, we sort of took them like we were taking them to a doctor with a fever. But after that, they would raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'd really love to talk with the person I was talking with."
And the number I tell parents a lot of times is like, how long is this going to take? Right? That's a big
Mhm.
question of like, are we going to be in weekly therapy for 3 years? I don't know. It depends. Divorce is one of those particular things that is complex on how long it will take, because it's actually an ongoing and active traumatic experience.
Mhm.
So usually divorce isn't like a one-time issue. It's like maybe this is going to take 6 months to get the divorce finalized, and then we're going to have to do this other
If they're
stuff
lucky, if
if
sure.
they're lucky. And so what
Yeah.
I say is, generally anxiety and depression with CBT, or I think particularly anxiety in the research, is 10 to 12 sessions.
Mhm.
That's not too much. That's like a semester of weekly therapy. If you're with someone who's super expensive, it's $2,000.
Mhm.
It costs more to go to Disney World, I promise you.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a better impact on their well-being than going to Universal Studios, I promise you.
And at the end of every podcast, I asked our guests to leave a mom with a guiding phrase, a motto that they can say to themselves as they're going through this, traumatic experience with their son. Do you have one you could share?
Yeah, this would be a tool. Like something, if you're going to remind yourself you're stuck with them grunting in response to you. You're trying as hard as you can, and it's changed. They don't want to talk about some things with you, which is a reality. That's why my job exists. At the same time, you're in it for the long haul. And so the tool that I give parents, and particularly moms, the most is, if you want them to talk to you, connect with you. Whatever your question was, if they give you an answer, it's tell me more.
Mhm.
Tell
Yep.
me more.
We've done a lot of podcasts on communication, and leaning in and listening is so valuable. Where can listeners go to learn more about you, and is teletherapy something that you do?
Yes. So jarrodhoffman.com is my website. It has that quiz. It has some blog posts. Like one of them is how to find a therapist, right? That's not always easy from the moment you discover that, hey, we need therapy. How do we get it? Where do we go to find someone who's reputable? So jarrodhoffman.com. I'm on LinkedIn as my social media. And the therapy, the virtual therapy, right? I recommend it. There's actually research on there's no difference between how efficient therapy and whether it works in a virtual or an in-person space, which is incredible. So take advantage of it. And then I'm licensed right now in the state of Tennessee. There's a chance that could increase in other states. But right now, Tennessee virtual, I can take clients there.
Well, Jarrod, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise and knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susie.
If this episode meant something to you, please follow and share the Mothers of Boys Survival Guide podcast on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Sharing helps other moms discover the show. Be kind to yourself, moms.